Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to March Mystery Madness. This is a huge BookTube event that takes place every March in which a whole bunch of us co-hosts join a whole bunch of you in wallowing in murder mysteries and indulging in our love of murder mysteries in all their different shapes and sizes. The theme for this year is 2 by 2. So are you reading an author's second book? Or are there two protagonists? Are there two murders? Something like that. There's two in the title. Also, you get a sort of a blanket pass on that because it's the year 2022. So you're covered either way. If you just want to read the next murder mystery that's coming up for you, you can do that. I myself am going to read, I originally sort of optimistically said that I wanted to read every new mystery that came out in the month of March. I did a TBR on a handful of them yesterday, but oh my God, there are probably 100, maybe 150 new mysteries coming out in the month of March. I cannot possibly read them all. I can't only read mysteries in the month of March. I cannot possibly read them all. That's a little humbling. So I will be reading a lot. I think I'm up to 3 so far for March Mystery Madness, but I plan on increasing that a lot this weekend. But before we go on and talk more about specific mysteries or other things, I thought we'd return to material that I've used in earlier March Mystery Madness videos because I've made almost 5,000 BookTube videos, and I can't expect you all to go spelunking through them, hunting for things. So a little bit of repetition is in order. A lot of you are new, and you aren't looking at my backlog of videos, and that's fine by me. So I thought we'd go, for today, we would concentrate not so much on which mysteries we're going to read, but on what mysteries are, and what they are and what they aren't. Are there, in fact, rules that are mostly observed? And do you agree with those rules? And do you notice them yourself? And to do this, we're going to go to a source that I've cited many times in March Mystery Madness in years past. We're going to go to, this is Howard Haycraft. He did a big book of essays about murder mysteries called The Art of the Mystery Story. And specifically, we're going to go to Monsignor Knox, who wrote us a 10 Commandments. He wrote us a Decalogue. What are you going to do, church people? He wrote us a Decalogue of laws governing murder mysteries. I love going through these just to get your reactions, what you think about all of these. So let's do a quick rundown of his Decalogue. This was from, he wrote this in 1928. So almost a full century ago. But I think it still holds. I think mysteries largely obey these rules. But let's see what they are. So number 1, the criminal must be someone mentioned in the early part of the story, but must not be anyone whose thoughts the reader has been allowed to follow. Do you agree with that? He says, the mysterious stranger who turns up from nowhere, in particular, from a ship as often as not, whose existence the reader had no means of suspecting at the outset, spoils the play altogether. And here he means not a stage play, but the fun of a murder mystery. So in other words, you've got to have your suspect in view. You can't give us an impenetrable murder mystery, an impenetrable whodunit, and then only at the end introduce the guy who did it. That doesn't work at all. That's totally dirty pool. Do you agree with that? And have you ever read a mystery that did that you still enjoyed? I think it's a really strong example of that would be one of the earliest murder mysteries in the relatively modern era, Murders at the Rue Morgue. But let's start. Let's go to number 2. All supernatural or preternatural agencies are ruled out as a matter of course. Harking back here to Sherlock Holmes, to his famous line, "No ghosts need apply," where he says, to solve a detective problem by such means would be like winning a race on the river by the use of a concealed motor engine. So you can't have any element of the supernatural involved, which would scupper things like MC Beaton. It would scupper people who actually do bring on an element of the supernatural. If you are a fan of MC Beaton, or things like that, if you're a fan of mysteries that have a supernatural element, are you a fan? Quite a few of the mysteries that do that, they incorporate a supernatural element, but they scrupulously avoid having the supernatural element solve the crime. It's still the detective, it's still the sleuth who's going to solve the crime. Very few supernatural mysteries that I've ever read does the main character simply get told by a goblin or a ghost, so-and-so is guilty. That very seldom happens, because I think that would ruin the story, no matter how well you did it. But do you believe in leaving them out completely? We'll move on to number 3 here. Not more than one secret room or passage is allowable. Now, when Monsignor Knox wrote that, that was a huge deal in murder mysteries. It was in almost every story that you read in Ellery Queen or, All Thrill magazine or whatnot. There was a secret passage of some kind. And it can be done well, But the reason that he's sort of facetiously saying he can't have more than one is that he'd really rather that you have none at all. It's a little bit cheap. It's a little bit lazy. What does he say about it? I would add that a secret passage should not be brought in at all unless the action takes place in the kind of house where such a device might be expected. Yes, like, for instance, I read a murder mystery a couple of years ago. Really liked it. In which a character buys a house in England for his retirement, and he finds a priest hole in that house. A carefully designed hole that was a holdover from a time period when priests were being hunted, and faithful families who were nevertheless professing the new faith would hide the priest from the authorities in the house. So it was a very cannily concealed room. And the gist of the story in that novel was that often an architectural feature of a priest hole was that the priest hole you discovered was a feint. And that there was actually an even smaller and more diabolically concealed priest hole within the house. And that the priest hole that you could find was the red herring to throw the authorities off the case. And the whole of the novel turns on that. And it was delightful. But there was a case where there were, in fact, 2 secret rooms. But it made sense. It made sense. I think Knox even mentions it, right? When I introduced one into a book myself, I was careful to point out beforehand that the house had belonged to Catholics in penal times. Okay, right, he does. And I don't think I read his book that did that. A number of books did that. Then we'll move on to number 4. Commandment number 4 is no hitherto undiscovered poisons may be used, nor any appliance which will need a long scientific explanation at the end. He elaborates, there may be undiscovered poisons with quite unexpected reactions on the human system, but they have not been discovered yet, and until they are, they must not be utilized in fiction. It is not cricket. And I would argue that this is basically a reflection of rule number 2. Don't invoke the supernatural. Don't invoke anything that you have to invent for the story, because then you tip your hand that you could invent anything. So in this particular commandment, you can't introduce a poison that kills somebody in 12.9 hours, but first makes them act insane towards their loved ones and no one else. You can't say, well, this poison does that. You can't do that. That's dirty pool. It's simply not cricket. Then commandment number 5 is a little bit on the touchy side. I don't have to worry about you people, but it is current year. So, whenever you come anywhere near anything that's period speech, you risk violent cancellation. Fortunately, in this little haven that you have given me on YouTube, I don't have to think about it. I've lost track of how many times I've thought to preface a video, and done it, prefaced a video with a large throat clearing about how, look, now careful, keep in mind, separate the artist from the art, separate the vocabulary of the time period from our sensitivities today, concentrate on what's important, don't give in to stupid virtue signaling, fake outrage, only to realize that I don't need to say that with you people. Somehow or other, I've strained out the people who would rant in the comments field about that. They don't watch these videos anymore. But nevertheless, I want to prepare you. This is Monsignor Knox, who was a very nice guy, writing for his time. So commandment number 5 is no Chinaman must figure in the story. And let him explain what he means by that. Why this should be so, I do not know, unless we can find a reason for it in the Western habit of assuming that the celestial, which was the typical slang used for Chinese people, is over-equipped in matters of brains and under-equipped in matters of morals. I only offer it as a fact of observation that if you are turning over the pages of a book and come across some mention of the slit-like eyes of Chin Lu, you had best put it down at once. It is bad. And here I want to stress that Monsignor Knox is not actually talking about Chinamen here. He is. But what he's really talking about is don't haul on a diabolical character who is diabolical by nature. Don't haul on some sort of ethnic or cultural stereotype that is either an obvious red herring or the bad guy. Don't do that. Your readers want more complexity than that. So, an example like from modern times, for instance, if you would update Monsignor Knox's Decalogue, then number 5 might easily be no Iraqi terrorists must figure in the story, right? You could easily do that. You see more easily what he means there. Don't haul on your society's current shibboleth in order to make the plot easier, right? Iraqi terrorists actually isn't card. That's actually 20 years old. But for instance, today, if you were to write a murder mystery today and you wanted either to make a really bald, dumb red herring, or you wanted to signal the bad guy ahead of time, what about a red hat wearing Trump supporter? You could easily do that. And you would be taking lazy advantage of the cultural baggage of such a figure. Don't do that, is what he's saying. He's not saying he doesn't want Chinese people in his mysteries, I should stress. Then we'll move on to commandment number 6. No accident must ever help the detective, nor must he ever have an unaccountable intuition, which proves to be right. This is the one that a lot of mystery authors will strain quite a bit. It can't be accidental. In other words, it has to be that the hero figures it out. And even more so, a lot of mystery aficionados, especially from the Golden Age, will say not only must the hero figure it out, but all the tools must be present for you to figure it out if you were as smart as the hero. There can't be any of these MacGuffins at the last minute that, if I'd known that, I might have figured it out. Can't be anything like that. Of course, whole mystery careers have been based on authors withholding that MacGuffin until the last minute. But this is the one that mystery authors often skirt. Because what do we mean by accident? Right? I just read a murder mystery by Niall Marsh, Death of a Peer. In that murder mystery, the investigator is questioning an extensive family, a large family, about a murder that took place 10 feet away from them all in the elevator between the two wings of their apartment. So someone had to do it. The idea is briefly floated in the story that maybe a stranger just bolted in off the street at ground level, killed the person in the elevator, and then sent the car back up. That is immediately dismissed, and rightfully so. That's ridiculous. That would be the equivalent of invoking the supernatural. So someone in that flat had to be guilty of the crime. And the main character is investigating. He's talking with them first together and then separately to compare their stories. And the action breaks only once from that. It breaks for one night. And when the main detective Allen, when he leaves to go on a walk before he goes home, he's standing on a bridge at night. It's cold, it's misty and whatnot. And a beat cop walks up to him. First thinks that he might be a civilian who's contemplating jumping off the bridge and killing himself. A beat cop walks up without recognizing him, and then does recognize him, realizes this is my superior 10 lines up the line and I must watch my P's and Q's. But the beat cop is conversational. He's chatty. He's bored on his rounds. And he starts to talk with the chief inspector. And at one point, the conversation gets around to Macbeth. Because the beat cop has just seen a play. He's just seen a version of Macbeth on the stage in his spare time when he's not walking his beat. And he makes a tossed-off comment about how, well, yeah, basically it boils down to the upper class just blaming the servants. And a penny drops in the detective's mind. Not necessarily that the servants are guilty, but that suddenly he understands the psychology of the people he's been talking to all night a little better in a key way that gives him an insight into solving the crime at the end of the book. And that's an accident, right? He was on a different route. We watch him. Marsh shows him developing a different route of the crime, a different idea. He was digging a groove for himself to who he was going to pin the murder on. And it wasn't the people he eventually pins the murder on. The only reason that he has a change in thinking is because he accidentally meets a beat cop who has just seen Macbeth and has a working man's interpretation of the play. That could easily be considered an accident. And Marsh is not the only writer to do that. Mystery authors do that all the time. All the time. And what was it again? Yes, or an unaccountable intuition that proves to be right. Monsignor Knox writes, this is perhaps too strongly stated. It is legitimate for the detective to have inspirations which he afterwards verifies. But he acts on them by genuine investigation. And again, he will naturally have moments of clear vision in which the bearing and observations hitherto made will become suddenly evident to him. There's a thin line between that and an unaccountable flash of inspiration. The unaccountable flash of inspiration is forbidden, according to Monsignor Knox. You can't do that. But you can come right up to the edge of it. Think about the famous ending of Red Dragon, right? Think about how Will Graham figures out who the Red Dragon is. It is a literal flash of inspiration. No one around him, everyone around him has seen everything that he has seen. He suddenly has a completely out of the blue realization. Everything's about seeing with you, isn't it? and suddenly he has the way to find the killer. Does that count or not? Is that forbidden or is it not? I don't know. I'm putting this all to you. I just think this sort of thing is so much fun. How we figure out the fence posts of this thing that we're all reading this month. I promise I won't do this every day. But let's move on to commandment number 7. The detective must not himself commit the crime. Pretty simple. Let's see what Monsignor Knox has to say about it. This applies only where the author personally vouches for the statement that the detective is a detective. A criminal may legitimately dress up as a detective, as in The Secret of Chimneys, and delude the other actors in the story with forged references. But otherwise, no. If the author has established that the investigator is an actual detective, then they have to be an actual detective. It can't be that the author is wrong. The author can have someone fooling the other characters, but if that isn't the case, it cannot be that the person investigating the crime is the person who committed the crime. I will try here not to go on a long diatribe about a certain Michael Dibdin novel that I wish he had never written. I will try not to go on a long diatribe about that. We'll simply say, I totally agree with this. Of course, you collapse the whole formula if you don't obey this commandment. Then commandment number 8 is the detective must not light on any clues which are not instantly produced for the inspection of the reader. So I left off questioning the witnesses. I was walking down the lane, and suddenly I spotted it on the ground. I reached down and picked it up. Well, this changes everything, I thought, tucking it into my breastcoat pocket. But never telling you what it is. Totally forbidden. Totally forbidden, because then it can be anything. What does the good Monsignor have to say about it? Any writer can make a mystery by telling us that at this point the great pitchlock holes suddenly bent down and picked up from the ground an object which he refused to let his friends see. He whispers, "Ha!" and his face grows grave. All that is illegitimate mystery-making. The skill of the detective author consists in being able to produce his clues and flourish them defiantly in our faces. There, he says, what do you make of that? And we make nothing. But it's right there. You can see it. Do you like that? Are you fascinated, or does that really bug you? Have you ever read a mystery when I've read countless mysteries where that rule is broken. Does it bother you? Or is it just part of what you don't know that is all mixed together in the suspense of the moment? Then commandment number 9 is the stupid friend of the detective, the Watson. Now here, Monsignor Knox is being unjust. He is using a shorthand, and he knows it. He was a Sherlockian of the first water. He knows that Watson's not stupid. But the Nigel Bruce Watson from the Basil Rathbone movies is very much stupid. So maybe that's what he's fainting at here. The stupid friend of the detective, the Watson, must not conceal any thought which passes through his mind. His intelligence must be slightly, but very slightly, below that of the average reader. I myself would argue here that this commandment is just plain wrong. I realize that I risk a confession of 10 Hail Marys and 10 Our Fathers for that, but I think this commandment is just wrong. I think the mystery novel is incredibly enhanced if the friend of the detective, not the stupid friend, but the friend of they always have a companion, a close confidant. Most of them do, except in gumshoe mysteries. But I think the mystery is enhanced a lot when the close friend, the confidant, is a little smarter than the average person. Not a little dumber. I think that makes it better. I think that throws the detective's ratiocination into an even better light. But what does the Monsignor say about it? This is a rule of perfection. It is not is not of the essence the detective story have a Watson at all. That's true. When Knox wrote this, the beginning of the Chandler-esque lone wolf gumshoe was only just starting, and he wouldn't have been the type to read those novels, but he could probably feel it in the wind. But if he does exist, he exists for the purpose of letting the reader have a sparring partner, as it were, against whom he can pit his brains. I may have been a fool, he says to himself when he puts the book down, but at least I wasn't such a doddering fool as that poor old Watson. I don't know that many murder mysteries in the last 30 years indulge in this at all. It is very lazy. And I think most mystery authors know that and disdain it for that reason. And then what is the final commandment here? And if I can remember, I will leave a link to the last time I went through this so that you can watch all the videos that I've done. I go back to this quite a bit, this decalogue of murder mysteries. The last commandment is twin brothers and doubles generally must not appear unless we have been duly prepared for them. So here, Monsignor Knox is taking square aim at March Mystery Madness 2022. Twins or doubles must not appear unless we know about them. You cannot leave until the end of a mystery reveal that so-and-so has a twin brother that has never been alluded to in the rest of the story. That is just dirty pool. Same as with no Chinamen appear in the story, or no supernatural, or no mystery poison that no one's ever heard of. You can't do that. You have to play by the rules of reality and of good storytelling. What does he say here? The dodge is too easy and the supposition too improbable. I would add that as a writer, that no criminal should be credited with the exceptional powers of disguise unless we have a fair warning that he or she was accustomed to making up for the stage. Uh, and what Monsignor Knox is getting at here is if you have to resort to this kind of bargain basement trickery, then you have written a weak book. And maybe it's incumbent on you to write a stronger book, or incumbent on readers to give your weak book a wide berth. So those are the 10 rules that Monsignor Knox came up with almost a century ago. I always love to repeat them at the beginning of March Mystery Madness, because they inevitably inform what we're reading. This was a diehard reader and writer of mysteries who had read millions of them by the time he wrote this Decalogue. So what do you think of those rules? Do any mystery writers that you read routinely break one of these commandments? First of all, do you agree that all of these commandments should be true? And whether you agree or not, the ones that you do agree should be commandments. Do you read mystery authors who routinely break these rules? I'd love to hear about it. I myself, of course, as I've said in earlier versions of this video, I've read murder mysteries in which the writer broke every one of these commandments and still managed to entertain me. It's all a matter of how it's done, but I generally agree that these things should be avoided. But anyway, let me know what you think. I'm going to wrap this up. We'll go on to March Mystery Madness again tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.